Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is the fifth entry into the Ghostbusters franchise. Fourth if you don't count that monstrosity from 2016, because I sure as hell don't. The Spangler family returns to where it all started, the iconic New York City firehouse, to team up with the original Ghostbusters, who've developed a top-secret research lab to take busting ghosts to the next level. But when the discovery of an ancient artifact unleashes an evil force, Ghostbusters, new and old, must join forces to protect their home and save the world from a second ice age. I'm not the biggest Ghostbusters fan, but I admire the franchise a lot. I don't think that there's a bad installment, except for 2016. Hate that one, because there's 4 Ghostbusters movies now. There's only 4 of them. That one doesn't count. I really like the first one. The second one's okay. Really liked Afterlife, really surprised me, had a strong emotional depth to it. So to say I was looking forward to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was a bit of an understatement, and it's a movie that I was slightly disappointed with, unfortunately. Still had some enjoyments. I think it's still a solid entry into the Ghostbusters franchise. It's just disappointing. I knew it wasn't going to be as good as Afterlife. I expected less from it than Afterlife, but even then, walking out of it, I just said to myself, that was less than what I was actually expecting. But what did I like about Ghostbusters Afterlife? Well, I think McKenna Grace really knocks it out of the park again as Phoebe. Phoebe is slowly becoming one of my favorite characters in this entire Ghostbusters franchise. I like what she's dealing with here. She's dealing with trying to fit in, growing up. She feels like she's put on the sidelines for much of the movie, and she wants to prove her worth. And I really actually dug that aspect of the movie. It gave Phoebe a lot more meaning in this movie than maybe I thought she was probably going to have, since she had a strong emotional core with Egon's ghost in Afterlife. And I said, how are they going to do something with Phoebe in this one? And it's nowhere near as good as what happens with Egon. I wasn't expecting it to be, though. I knew that they were going to come back down to earth a little bit, but at least they gave Phoebe something to do, and she is at least the focus. And I'm glad, and I'm curious to see where the focus with Phoebe is going to go in future installments. The family dynamic between the Spanglers is also really interesting here. I mean, now you have an added piece. You have Paul Rudd, Gary Gruberson, Mr. Gruberson, the science teacher. He's an added element now to the family. And the way that they're dealing with certain things, the way that Phoebe is dealing with certain things related to Mr. Gruberson, how Mr. Gruberson has to act around the kids. Interesting stuff. I thought that all of that was really the heart and soul of the movie, and what really worked the most in the movie for me. I did like the blending of the old and the new. I liked how we had the original Ghostbusters teaming up with a younger generation of Ghostbusters and newer Ghostbusters that were a little bit older to take down this new threat in New York City, blending old technology with new technology. It worked well. It was a way to keep the past present while advancing forward into the future with the newer Ghostbusters and the newer generation, as if we're still passing the torch, which I'm fine with. If these movies revolve around the old Ghostbusters passing the torch on to a new generation, which you could argue is what Afterlife did, you can argue it's what this movie does, maybe repetitively, but I'm fine with that. I feel like that's the purpose of these movies, passing the torch on to a new generation. And speaking of Paul Rudd, of course, he's Paul Rudd. He's amazing. He's awesome. He's friggin' hilarious in this movie. He has the best jokes in this movie. He's the best comedy in this movie. He's the one who you want for the comic relief in this movie, while you rally around the family because you want to see what their emotional core is for this movie. You're there with Paul Rudd for the comic relief, and he delivered it. I also have to commend Gil Kenan, and Jason Reitman for delivering an original concept for a ghost. That was one of my problems with Afterlife. I get why Afterlife had to do Gozer again, but I just think they could have went about maybe doing Gozer a different way. It just felt like it was a rehash of the first one. I get it was like the new generation of characters having to fight what the legacy characters fought in the original Ghostbusters, so it came full circle. I get all that. That was the one aspect of Afterlife that just didn't work for me. I just felt it was just an unnecessary rehash, even with that in mind. And I was happy with this one that they came up with an original concept for a ghost. I think Garak is a cool concept. Freezing New York City in ice in the middle of the summer. Interesting concept. I just don't think the execution for it is really handled all that well. This movie, when you think of what's actually happening in this movie, you can pinpoint many of the problems to the screenplay. There is too much going on. This movie feels so jumbled, it feels like a mess. There's an overabundance of characters. There's so many subplots. You have this new villain in Garaka who's not even all that fleshed out. It feels like an afterthought, honestly, and I get that many of the threats in Ghostbusters really don't come to a head until about the last third of the movie. It's always been about the slow buildup to the threat that the Ghostbusters are actually facing. But for me, in this one, it felt like it just took too long to get things jump started. There's even points in this movie where I said, what is the purpose of this movie? Like, where are we going? Where are we progressing? And I can just relate that to a really, really weak script. And that is my biggest issue with Frozen Empire, is that the script feels very hollow. It feels empty. It feels like it's overstuffed with so many characters that all of that stuff just feels like that all the other stuff regarding Garaka as a ghost that freezes things, it just feels like an afterthought. It feels like a very undercooked villain for me. I even think Vigo the Carpathian is a better villain than Garaka. And quite frankly, I think I enjoy Ghostbusters 2 more than Frozen Empire. I don't think that that's really a knock against Frozen Empire, but as I said, these movies always had a slow build to them. But even scenes in the first one, second one, and Afterlife, there was always something in the middle that kept you engaged. Like there's that chase scene in the middle of Afterlife with Phoebe, Trevor in the Ecto 1 in the middle of the small Oklahoma town trying to catch Muncher. That was a nice little thing to keep the pace going. There's nothing really like that in this movie. It starts off with a bang, and then the next hour and 10 or so is so many different things happening, stuff with Kumail Nanjiani's character, which I didn't like him. In this, I thought that he was trying to be too funny when he's trying to be funny like he was in Eternals. That's where I think he's at his best. Here it was him trying too hard, and I don't think that that's what Ghostbusters is. I think Ghostbusters comedy is supposed to feel natural, woven in, subtle, which is what makes Paul Rudd work so well in these movies. Kumail Nanjiani was just going for it, and I didn't really like his character, and I didn't really like how his character was related to certain things that happen in this movie. There's a whole thing with Phoebe and another character that I didn't like either. There's so much time spent here and less time on Garaka the villain that it just doesn't feel like it's all fleshed out all that much. It feels so undercooked in the end. It has too much of a slow pace to it to actually feel like I'm still engaged in the movie, even though I'm still engaged in it, if you know what I mean. And a big part of that, too, is the surprisingly really serious tone for this movie. It doesn't feel like it's a light, breezy type of movie like the first three did. It feels like it's taken things a lot more seriously, and maybe it's because the threat has stepped up from being in a small Oklahoma town like it was in Afterlife to the big city of New York where the first two took place. It's like, okay, things are more dire, a lot more serious, a lot more urgent now. I don't think Ghostbusters is meant to be taken that seriously, nor do I think it should be slapstick like 2016. It should just be the correct amount of balance between horror and comedy. Just take those subtle approaches. And this movie just didn't go for it. It just played it a little bit safe. It's not an outright terrible movie. I know that there's people out here saying it's one of the worst movies of the year that they've seen. It's a very well-made movie. I still think it's an engaging enough foray into the Ghostbusters franchise that kept me mostly entertained, but it is definitely the slowest out of the four. And I do think this is probably the most intriguing villain that had the most potential that ended up just being a whole wasted product. I do think that this is actually worse than Ghostbusters 2, but it is definitely better than the 2016 Ghostbusters, and don't let anybody else tell you differently. I enjoyed Ghostbusters Frozen Empire enough to enjoy 3/4 of a bucket of popcorn. So if you guys have seen Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, let me know what you think of it in the comment section below. I'll leave my link to my website in the description below as well. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I will see you at the movies somewhere.